Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prague Chattery 777, where today I'll be continuing and concluding, for the time being, my conversation on Premiata Fornaria Marconi with their fifth studio album released in 1977, Jet Lag. So I think Jet Lag makes a really nice pair with the previous album, Chocolate Kings. Those two albums, I think, make a very nice, distinctive time period, mid-career time period, or not really mid-career, but mid-70s period, I guess. They're almost like a brother and sister pair of albums, kind of like A Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering by Genesis. But when talking about Jet Lag, I think it's important to talk about Chocolate Kings, because Chocolate Kings really marks that distinctive change in direction for PFM. Obviously, they introduced a sixth member on lead vocals with Chocolate Kings, and he's clearly listening to bands like Family and Genesis, because we hear that American soul influence, and both singers in Genesis and Family were big into American soul, and so his vocals kind of bring that into the band. But with Chocolate Kings, it's not just the soul influence, it's also the jazz influence that starts to take over. So the jazz and the soul slowly start to overtake the classical and European folk that's present on the first three albums. And the result is something that's much more fusion-like. And the fusion influence, that really goes all the way back to the third album, La Sola di Niente / The World Became the World. But it really comes to the fore at this point by the time we get to Jet Lag. And Jet Lag it continues from where Chocolate Kings leaves off, in that the more American influence starts creeping in. And what the new thing that Jet Lag brings to the table is funk. I think this is a very funky album, probably one of the funkiest prog albums you're ever likely to hear. And like I said, on the surface it just sounds like, a fusion band. And, obviously they must have been listening to a lot of fusion bands as well, because 1977, it's kind of like the peak of fusion, really, as far as my knowledge goes. So it's all quite interesting, and it is different. Jet Lag and Chocolate Kings are very different from the first three albums, and I think apart from the more American influence, I think important thing, and I think I mentioned this in the previous video, is at this point in their career, mid-70s, PFM's much more focused on the playing. They're writing songs to showcase their musicianship rather than to showcase elaborate songs. The first three albums are about the songs. Whereas at this point, it's, check out this keyboard solo, check out this guitar solo, check out this lick, check out, this violin piece. And that's fine, it's a different, mindset to be in, but, the end result is, it's both good, it ultimately depends on what my mood is. If I want to listen to great musicians, then I can listen to Jet Lag or Chocolate Kings, or if I want to listen to some classic, classic prog, then I can listen to the first three albums. Although I still need to buy Storia di un Minuto. I gotta buy the first one yet, so this is all theoretical, I guess. But my point is, it depends on my mood, whether I want to listen to an album of cool playing or an album of cool songs. So, even though it might be controversial, I think Chocolate Kings and Jet Lag are no better and no worse than the first three albums. They're just different. And that's fine, it's all about, these bands are supposed to be progressive, so, these albums showed PFM exploring territories that they hadn't explored yet, which is exactly what you should expect from a band like that. But, anyway, I'll try and keep my rambling moving forward, so, I'll try to dissect the tracks a little bit. So side one opens with Peninsula. Now this is a fantastic little guitar piece by Franco Macida, who had been in the band, obviously, from the beginning, and he stayed with the band all the way up until 2015. I probably should have mentioned his name in some of the earlier videos, but I was a little self-conscious trying to pronounce their names. But anyway, point is, Franco is a fantastic guitar player, and Peninsula is a wonderful showcase of his talent. It's a great way to open the album, too. It's almost like a false start, because there's nothing else quite like it on the album. There's not a whole lot of acoustic guitar, which is kind of maybe one of the controversial things with Jet Lag, but I think it's a great piece. It's a great blend of the classical guitar style, but there's also a lot of jazzy chords in there too. There's a couple of moments where he does these wild descending patterns, and I couldn't tell you what guitar chords he's playing. I'm not that guitar literate, unfortunately, but it just sounds really cool to my ears. It's a perfect marriage of classical and jazz. And, I guess you could compare Peninsula to Horizons from Foxtrot. I keep comparing them to Genesis. I'm not sure what that's all about, but I think there is sort of a fair comparison between those two. And again, perhaps controversially, I think I like Peninsula more than Horizons. How about that? The Genesis comparison is very strange. I keep thinking Genesis, but PFM has notably been compared to ELP. Maybe that's because they were signed to Manticore Records, or they have, a three-letter abbreviated name. I'm not really too sure. But I don't hear a whole lot of ELP in PFM, to be totally honest with you. Maybe I'm crazy. It's possible. Anyway, moving on to track 2, we get the title track, Jet Lag. Now this, to me, I think is the centerpiece of the album. It is the big epic. It is, 9 minutes long, and it is quite fantastic. It's in 3 distinct sections, so that's not really surprising. A lot of, the 70s prog classics were subdivided into sections. But with Jet Lag, the song, all the sections are separated, and we do get, a few seconds of silence between each of the 3 sections. And it's interesting because, generally, other proggy songs that do that and they separate the sections of their songs, I don't really like that. If any of you have watched my Caressive Steel review by Rush, my biggest criticism of the epic on that album, Fountain of Lamneth, is the fact that all the pieces of that track are separated and it doesn't feel like one cohesive piece. But it's very interesting with Jet Lag because I think the separating the 3 distinct sections kind of gives it, a strength. I can't really pinpoint where that is, but I mean the thing does work as a whole, and it's a great track. Very keyboardy, a keyboard dominated sound. There's a very distinct keyboard tone that comes through. There's still lots of great guitar playing and violin playing in that, but it is different. That's the other notable thing, is a change in violin player on this album. Sorry, I'm steering away from the tracks briefly, but a new violinist on this album who does not play woodwinds, so a very notable absence is the flute. There's no flute on Jet Lag, so that's important, I suppose. Anyway, back to the title track, Jet Lag. Great epic. It's in 3 distinct sections, and the first section is kind of the more upbeat, rocky one. The very first few bars of Jet Lag are very jarring almost. It starts right with the vocals, and it's kind of a dissonant, weird, pattern. You don't really know where it's going, but once it starts up and the riff kind of comes in, then you're snapping your fingers and tapping your feet quite quickly because that funky sound is immediately present. I think the bass player was playing pretty much all the tracks on this album. He's playing a fretless bass. And he's already kind of a funky player, but he's getting funkier, and that, like I said, that's translating into the sound. But the first movement of Jet Lag is really, really good. Lots of great riffs, lots of great playing. And by the time we make it to the second section, it's the first point where we get the main melody. And the main melody of Jet Lag is fantastic. It's like a classic PFN moment. That da 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 da. I love that. I love that though. In the second section, it kind of introduces that melody. It's much more mellow. We get a bit more of the acoustic guitars to kind of support the melody. And I do love that keyboard sound. It is a classic sound of the 70s, isn't it? Anyways, the second movement kind of winds its way down. I mean, it builds up slowly and then winds its way back down. We get the final closing section of the song, which is, again, very funky. I love that backbeat, that back rhythm. It's like a very American funky thing, but it's fantastic. And then the melody comes through once again, and it sits on top of the funky bass line, and it's a fantastic track. I would consider Jet Lag a classic PFM track. Very good stuff, and probably the best on the album. Definitely the centerpiece of the album. Then we move on to track 3 of side 1, Storia in L.A. This must be a reference to where they recorded the album, in Burbank, California, but obviously they would have visited L.A. at some point. I think that's very telling that they recorded this in the States as well. And it's just a mellow instrumental. It almost feels like the conclusion to Jet Lag, actually, because he's using that same kind of keyboard patch, keyboard tone, whatever. Patch, I don't think that was a word back in those days. It might have been, I have no idea. I wasn't there. But it almost feels like the coda to the title track. Doesn't feel like a separate track, but it's really good. Very mellow, and it's kind of, as it builds to a gentle crescendo and it makes its way back. It's essentially just a keyboard solo, really, a repeating bass line that slowly builds in intensity, and it's all about the keys. And yeah, it's a good track, a nice way to keep the album moving along. Then we get to track 4 of side 1, Breakin In. Now this is a great track. This is where we see the guitar sort of take the lead for a little bit. It's a very guitar-led song, and I just love that syncopated rhythm that the guitar does in that track. It's very simple too. I mean, they've always had a simpler track on their albums. You know, songs like Celebration and Chocolate Kings, the title track. You know, a more straight-ahead rock number. But I just really like the riff. It's a very syncopated riff. And yeah, it's a good song. Not one of the best on the album, but you know, again, it contributes to that nice flow. After we have the instrumental of Storia in LA, Breakin In kind of picks things back up, and it gets us ready for the second side, which we will flip over to. Ha 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 ha! I like the album cover too. It's a nice album cover. And side 2 opens with Cerco La Lingua, or Lingua. See, this is why I try not to say too much Italian, because I botch the pronunciation quite terribly. But this is notable. This is the one Italian track on the album. It is almost an entirely English language album once again. Chocolate Kings was entirely English language. This is almost entirely English language, because we have this one, which is the one Italian track. And it's a great track. I really like the violin intro. Definitely a showcase for the new violinist, Gregory Bloch, not really too sure how that's pronounced, but opens with this fantastic violin introduction and winds its way into the main track, which is a quite high energy, you know, classic PFM track. And it's very strange hearing the singer sing in Italian with that American soul influence. I don't think I've heard anything else quite like that. It's a very unique thing. But great track on the whole. Then we wind our way to track 2 of side 2, Meridiani. Now this is another instrumental, but I think this is much more distinctive as a separate piece than Storia in LA, which, like I said, is kind of like a coda to the title track. And Meridiani is a fantastic song. It's got a really nice, gentle, relaxing, you know, beginning part. Just a softly repeating bass line, and you know, bits of solo here and there, bits of keyboard, bits of guitar, some cool licks here and there. And right around the halfway point, we get that big distinctive change, and the energy level goes right up, and that's where you really hear the fusion thing. Like I said, the fusion thing had been starting all the way back till the Solo di Niente / The World Became the World, and we really hear it kind of fully formed on the second half of Meridiani, which is a great track. And some, you know, wild playing, fantastic playing by the entire band. Very good stuff. Move on to track 3 of side 2, track 7 overall. We get Left-Handed Theory. This is a fun track, some fun lyrics about famous people who are very talented who also happen to be left-handed. I'm not one of those people. I have a very boring drum set because it's just like everyone else's, a right-handed drum set. Interestingly, I teach drums on the side, and I've got a lot of left-handed students, and I always comment on how much cooler their drum set looks, and that Phil Collins was left-handed as well. Anyway, getting sidetracked. Left-Handed Theory. Musically, this is probably the most fusion-y thing on the album, and that's saying something because it is a very much an album influenced by fusion. And Left-Handed Theory has got like the crazy energy of fusion, and it's got lots of great lyrics on it as well. But it's a track about playing. It's not really, you know, the song wasn't written to showcase the lyrics. It was more about, you know, just you know, the crazy playing, right? And it's a great song. Not one of my favorites on the album. Probably it could be the best on the second side, though. I think it's either going to be Meridiani or Left-Handed Theory is best song on the second side for me. But it doesn't matter. It's all good, isn't it? And we're at the end of the album now with track 4, side 2, track 8 overall, Traveler. Now this is almost like a mantra. This is, again, very simple song. Simpler than Breakin In, actually. Like I said, it's almost like a mantra. It's just this repeating theme, very optimistic, very positive, very accessible, almost commercial at some points. But it's a good song. Arguably, it might be my least favorite on the album. I don't know. If it's either Traveler or Storia in LA. Traveler is a nice song, but it lacks the big epic conclusion of certain other tracks, like Promenade the Puzzle, for example. But yeah, it's a good track. The thing that I like most about it is when the mantra breaks and they kind of go into like a weird free jazzy kind of area, and then the mantra comes back, the main theme or whatever. But yeah, it's an okay end to a very good album ultimately. Yeah, so I think that pretty much concludes it for PFM so far. Like I said, I have to wait until I collect more of the Italian versions of the albums before I can record any more, because I've talked about all the PFM albums that I own. Except for Cook. I do have Cook, which is a live album recorded in Toronto and New York. Which I may be tempted to talk about at some point or another, but I'm going to switch gears for now. I think the PFM is good for now. I'm sure the more folks want me to talk about other PFM albums, but like I said, it's going to take me time to build my collection up, because I do not own them all. It'll probably be a little while before I own them all, because I think a lot of them are imports for me. But that's okay. I don't mind investing in my music collection. So, yeah, on that note, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed my chat. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and all the rest of that fun stuff. And stay tuned for more random chats and incoherent ramblings about music and stuff. Blah, 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 blah. Thanks again. You'll see me in the future. Farewell.